Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes coming to you this cold Thursday morning to talk to you about cooperatives who may be able to warm your soul for the future. This morning we have Mr. Bruce Reynolds with us. He's from the United States Department of Agriculture and their Rural Development, and he is a program leader in their cooperative programs. But I want to wish everybody a Happy New Year. This is the first program for this new 2015, and I'm very pleased to have Mr. Bruce Reynolds in the studio with us. Good morning, Bruce.
Good morning, Vernon.
So can you tell me how you got started in co-ops?
Well, after graduate school, I originally studied history and was very interested in agricultural history. And then I studied economics, and so I was an entry-level economist at USDA. And after about 5 months working in the Foreign Agricultural Service, I started with the cooperatives, what was called the Farmer Cooperative Service, and this is 1978. So I've had a long career there with cooperatives since 1978, and our agency has been merged and reorganized throughout its history. But we go back a long time. We were started by the Agricultural Marketing Act of 1926, and that was under the Coolidge administration. And I think that they were a very pro-business, kind of small government kind of approach. And they thought that cooperatives, and at that time agricultural cooperatives were pretty significant numbers. There were probably maybe over 20,000 or more cooperatives back then, and actually around 12,000 or so. And they thought that this would be a way that people of self-help, people could do it themselves, kind of a grassroots movement, and it wouldn't require big government support. And as we know, mostly in agriculture, the government has had a major role in helping farmers, but I think the idea of having cooperatives there would be that they could do a lot of self-help with the farmers themselves, operating businesses, controlling the marketing and their farm supplies. And I think it's had a positive impact, and our agriculture has prospered, and cooperatives, farmer cooperatives have made a great contribution towards that. Now, in recent years, our agency we were moved under the Clinton administration into rural development. And we sort of had started a process of broadening our approach, looking at other types of cooperatives, even, housing to some extent, more so in this movement of local food and food hubs, food cooperatives. And some of these are multi-stakeholder, where you have farmers and you have the workers in like a food co-op, and consumers, and that's where you get the multi-stakeholder. And that's been a big part of our work lately. And we have grant programs, and we administer grants to support both food co-ops and other types of food businesses. And we also have grants to support centers, which do some research, but they do the sort of consulting and technical assistance to help people start up cooperatives. And they're called Rural Cooperative Development Centers, and we have special grants for them. And this is work that my agency, we used to do directly. When I came on in 1978, we had about 120 staff people who just went out, traveled around the country helping merge farmer cooperatives or start up new farmer cooperatives. And I did that work for about 22 years organizing cooperatives. But now,
so you went around the world, around the U.S.
Yeah,
organizing
all over the U.S. Yeah, not internationally.
Okay,
but in rural areas. And gradually, though, they've cut that back. They didn't want, somebody like me just traveling out to Texas or whatever and setting up co-ops. They wanted to do it locally. And so they established these rural cooperative development centers that in various states, they get support from their states, they get support from us in terms of grants, and in terms of other co-ops within their state. And so they're kind of like the go-to place if you want to start a co-op in a rural area. Now, some of these centers, they also work in urban areas as well, but our grant funding has to be restricted to their work in rural areas. And another area that has been important now that we're expanding and I've been working on is small rural businesses. And we have this sort of baby boomer generation that in the post-World War II era that people started businesses in rural areas, and many of them are family-owned, and they're up in retirement age. And we want to try to preserve a lot of these businesses because they mean a lot to the small towns. If you lose a business, it really hurts the employment in the town. And so we've had what I've been working on recently. We've always had in our rural development area, we've had a loan guarantee program called the Business and Industry Loan Guarantees. And these loan guarantees can be for, infrastructure in a local area, water systems, and a variety of things. And one of the uses has been that if a business was going to be sold, the new buyers could get a loan guarantee, and that often made it feasible for them to get a loan from a bank because the loan guarantee goes to the bank. So then they're protected as much as 80 or 85% if the loan fails. But the restriction they've had on this was that it had to be a one-time deal. The original owners, once the settlement date is had in the transaction, they have no remaining interest. They have to completely sell out, and then the new owners pay them off with the loan backed by a loan guarantee. It's a single transaction. Well, that doesn't work very well if you want to transition your business like to your employees or your workers. And there's been a lot of interest in that and a lot of ideas of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives has promoted this idea of succession of businesses to the workers. And the Ohio Employee Ownership Center in Ohio, and one of their directors who passed away a few years ago, John Logue, had come to USDA and visited with us about making the loan guarantee in smaller increments so you could do a series of them. And then the owners would stay within the business and they could organize as a cooperative, and then the employees would learn how to run the business, and then they would gradually pay out whatever the agreed upon value of the business is to the original owners. And then finally, the last loan guarantee would be the final payment, and then the individuals would retire, and then the employees would have a fairly reasonable loan to pay off to finally become owners of the business. And we think it's a good way to preserve businesses. And that was we had the rules on it were the proposed rules were published in the Federal Register in October actually in September, and it closed in November 15th, the comment period. And now we have about 280 or so comments. Actually, on the regulations.gov for the Federal Register, there were 231 comments. There might have been some that were delivered by mail. But out of that, 183 comments were directed just to this particular provision for cooperatives, because the rules covered other aspects of the loan guarantee program not related to cooperatives, but the interest level was very strong. And so we're going to be putting it into final and hope to get clearance through OMB sometime this summer. And then we'll have this program in place. And again, unfortunately, it's only limited to rural communities. My hope is that there was a cooperative development proposal, an act that was proposed by Congressman Fata, who is in the Philadelphia area, is his district, and he's in the House of Representatives. And Congressman Fata's cooperative program that he's proposing would be located in HUD, the Housing and Urban Development. And the idea would be that they would have an agency somewhat like what my agency was or has evolved into, but we're getting quite smaller, and this would be a nationwide program where they would provide grants to support centers and support co-op development. They could provide loan guarantees. They could provide research and technical assistance help in planning, various types of worker co-ops, consumer co-ops, and another big area that we worked on.
Well, Bruce, you have said a lot, and I want to go back and break some of it down to make sure that people understand. But the first thing I wanted to say is, and I try to give you a definition of a co-op. A co-op is any business that you can think of. Normally, the different co-ops depends on who owns the business and what kind of business it is. For instance, if the employees own it, then it's called a worker co-op. Very, very, very simple. If the employees own it and control it, it's called a worker co-op. If the people that use the product or services own the business, then it's a consumer co-op. And examples are credit unions or housing co-ops. In these two examples, the consumer owns the business. In the credit union, the consumer, the people that put their money in, are the owners of the business, and then they elect a board of directors who control and governs the business. So, those are the two major types of co-ops. And then in the farmer co-ops, as an example, they have the purchasing co-ops where they join together and they buy goods, and we've had a number of people on the program talking about that. And if they are selling their product, producer co-ops?
They tend to call them marketing co-ops.
Marketing co-ops.
Yeah. There sometimes people, they didn't want to, they are producers, but they didn't want to sort of conflate it with an actual, in various parts of the world, there are actual agricultural production co-ops where they collectively produce.
Okay.
But in the U.S., it's been more the individual operates their farm enterprise, and they're the sole or family owns the farm, and then they band together for the purchasing side and then the marketing their grain, their cotton or dairy, milk production, which is very big in the U.S. Cooperatives.
If you have a question or comment for Bruce Reynolds or myself, you can call in at 1-800-450-7876. If you have any question or comments, we'd appreciate a call in at 1-800-450-7876. And National Co-op Bank is sponsoring this program. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
News updates on the web at WOLDCnews.com.
Good morning. This WOL Traffic Update is brought to you by Prince George's Community College. On outbound New York Avenue, they're back again today. Working, the utility construction is outbound New York after the 3rd Street Tunnel before North Capitol Street. Only the left lane gets by, slowing you down out of the 3rd Street Tunnel once again and leaving Mount Vernon Square on outbound New York Avenue. Prince George's Community College offers affordable and convenient degree programs and continuing education classes. Day, evening, weekend, or online. Spring classes begin January 20th. Enroll at pgcc.edu. Now your WOL weather forecast brought to you by TrueCar.com for today. Partly cloudy, windy, and cold, highs in the 20s tonight. Mainly clear, down to 10 degrees for tomorrow, a sunny day with a high only near 24. TrueCar.com's changing car buying forever. TrueCar.com users get negotiation-free, guaranteed savings. Save time, save money, never overpay. Visit TrueCar.com today. Steve Hirschhorn for News Talk 1450 WOL, where information is power.
Information is power. WOL says that all the time, and we totally agree with it. That's the reason that the National Cooperative Bank is sponsoring this program, is to give you information so that you can perhaps start a co-op or join a co-op. One of the most, which Bruce and I were talking about during the break, is that one of the distinguishing factor about a cooperative is its users. The users are the one that have the total control of the cooperative. There are 7 principles in co-op, and the first one is volunteer and open membership. And there's a number of reasons I like all 7 of these principles are part of it, and that it doesn't make any difference about your race or your gender or how much education you have or your wealth. If you become a member, the co-ops are open to anybody and everybody. It's democratic member control is the second principle. There's members' economic participation, and that means that often you have to buy in. If you are in a credit union, you have to put some money in. If you're in a housing co-op, you have to pay your monthly fees. We had Equal Exchange on, which is a worker co-op, during the Christmas in December, and there was a $3,500 buy-in that everybody had to pay in order to become a member. But also, and when Dame Pauline Green was on, from the president of the International Cooperative Alliance, she made sure that I mentioned this, is that if there's a payoff, if at the end of the day there's more money brought in than spent, then that payoff can be, and the members will decide this, can be divided up between the members. And Equal Exchange, they divided 40% of what their profit was to the members. So you get this members' economic participation both ways. There's a buy-in, and then there's a share-in of the profits. It's autonomous and independent. And a lot of times if the co-op borrows money, it has to be made sure that in those loan documents that the co-op still has the control and not the bank. And again, Dame Pauline Green brought up that in a lot of countries, the government wants to get in and tell the co-op how it operates. And she said that's changing a lot, particularly in Africa. So the co-ops have the autonomy and independence. And the first reason I like co-ops is their 5th principle, and that is education, training, and information. It's constantly training. And I like that you take everyday people and you give them the education they need to run a business. And working cooperatively, they can run this business and use each other's skills to make it successful. Where if you wanted to start a business individual, you're only talking about one person. But if 5 people get together, then you got 5 people with 5 sets of skills that can get together and get some training and run the business, and it's a better chance of success once they learn how to work cooperatively. The 6th one is cooperation among cooperatives. Equal Exchange talked about that. They bought from smaller farmers throughout the world, and they had fair trade, gave them a fair price, and then they sold to a lot of co-ops, particularly food co-ops. So they had a three-folder of cooperatives. They bought from them and they sold to them. Cooperation among cooperatives. And then the 7th one is concern for community. And you got in the co-op DNA is this concern for community. So they don't necessarily need a division for corporate responsibility because they're mostly developed or started up to solve some community problem, whatever that problem is. And we've had a number of different people talking about the different problems that existed. Papa Sin was on and said when he was in Senegal, he moved into the city where the suburbs, there were no housing, so they created a housing co-op. And then they could not get people to school in the city or to work, so they started a transportation co-op and bought a couple buses so they could move people around. Then as it grew, then they decided they wanted their own education, so they started an education co-op. Okay, and so every time that there was a need, they would start a co-op to fill that need. And there was a consistent concern for community and an environment and green. So co-ops are wonderful organizations for the everyday person to get the skills that they need to solve their own problems, and that's why I like them a lot. Yeah. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, Vernon, I really like your discussion there. I mean, it explained how it's really co-ops come out of the community, and they're a grassroots movement, and they develop in the community. They're not like centrally planned, from the capital city, and it's the people who are in control, and then they they identify what really are their important needs and then meet them, like what you said. And a lot of what co-operatives are, it's kind of a business and a service entities that they're driven by principles, and you could say to some extent ethical principles, like the open membership and the democratic control, and then on the principles of education training, I think coupled with that is just the transparency of cooperatives.
Yep.
Like if you're in the co-op, the members have a vote. They vote. It's just one member, one vote.
One member, one vote.
It's not based on any shares like in corporations. And you elect the board of directors, and the board of directors is from the membership. And the business is transparent. People know what's going on. And so, there's not this, suspicion of are we going to get fired today, or is the business going to move to China? You don't have any of that.
Or what's happening to the money, because they can see it.
Right.
They share it.
You control the business, and it gives you a sense of stability. And then there's a lot of things about the principles that I think will support the community, as gives to community in the future. I think with housing cooperatives, the limited equity cooperative is that, you share in the equity. There's like a blanket mortgage over the property, and you can benefit from that equity that you get in your share paying off that large blanket loan. And then if you decide to move and you leave the housing co-op, you get a what's called a return, but it's not a market-based return. It's a limited return, and that's what keeps the housing affordable. So this is people acting together in a housing cooperative to sustain affordable housing for the future. And it's a principle that it's in some ways, I wrote an academic article one time called Cooperative Principles as Constraints for Public Goods. And many in the co-op community thought, well, you shouldn't use that word constraint. But what I was really getting at is that in a free market society, which is good, it generates a lot of wealth and it's good, but it's not the only way to operate. In some sectors of our economy, we need cooperatives to give people control and stability. And in the worker cooperatives, and Vernon had mentioned about, you return any profits, they go back to the members in the worker cooperative. And that's true for farmer cooperatives. All the money is eventually returned. So what economists say, well, you don't have permanent capital. So to deal with that, they often have reserves. They have a reserve, and that gives them their permanent capital, so they can go to a bank and get a loan, because the banks are reluctant to loan to you if the equity you have is going to be revolved back to the members. You have a commitment to return that to members. But if you set up a reserve, you have that permanent capital. And worker cooperatives and farmers use that to deal with when business is down and the economy is not doing well. They can survive during the low points with their reserves. Now, when business is really good, the reserves can build up and they can be really valuable. Now, some people decide they want to demutualize, and that's been a movement that in the principles of the ICA, International Cooperative Alliance, they have what are called indivisible reserves. And if they're very big in Italy and France and other countries and in the U.S. worker cooperatives as well. The indivisible reserve means that, let's say you create a very profitable business. And that happened like in agriculture, Rockingham Poultry Cooperative. It began to Diamond Walnut was a cooperative. I'll use the Diamond Walnut example. It became so popular that people decided, well, let's just demutualize, and so they've lost that cooperative. Now the growers are struggling in California to bargain for a better price for their walnuts.
So demutualize means that they took their money out?
It becomes privatized, yeah, and then investors buy it. So the investors see that a co-op is based on users, the consumers, the farmers, the workers who use the co-op. But other businesses have investor owners who don't really use the thing. They just have an investment position. So when they demutualize, you sell it off to investors, and then you get a one-time profit, and then it's gone for the future. Yep. So the indivisible reserve can keep these businesses going in the future, because if you if you decide to sell the business, if you're a worker cooperative and it becomes really profitable, you decide to sell it, the indivisible reserve goes to charities, and so or to co-op development, and you can't capture it. And it's such a big part of the business that it's a disincentive to demutualize.
Okay.
And then on the other side, when you're doing poorly, it helps you survive.
When you're talking about limited equity co-ops, there was a study done on a co-op in Atlanta called Wildwood. 250-unit cooperative had been in business for 40 years. The return on the investment that somebody put in, and that investment was normally about the equivalence of a security deposit, 1 month's rent. It could have been 2 months' rent, but that return was like 7.1%. And they figured that was a better return they could have gotten anywhere else. So it ended up being profitable, because I used to think that because it was limited equity, that it was bad for the people. But it turned out that they had a better return than they would have gotten anywhere else. And I argue because of the people who were there, they probably wouldn't have saved anything. So, and then also because there was a write-off, write off your property taxes and interest. Each individual gets that write-off. That did not include that. The other major piece, when you talk about over time, because there's not the profit motive and because people take better care of the property once they understand their owners, that the expenses go down. And so the cost for rent at Wildwood was like $500. An apartment down the street was $700 or $800. If you took all of those savings plus the it just turned out this tremendous, tremendous wealth building in a co-op. And we're going to take another break. We'll be right back talking to Bruce Reynolds from the U.S. Department of Agriculture about cooperatives. We'll be right back.
$14.50 WOL.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes with Everything Cooperative. We're talking to you about cooperatives and how in agriculture, how they got started in the 1920s. Mr. Bruce Reynolds is with us today with cooperation programs of USDA Rural Development, and he's a program leader. He's been there for 37 years with Department of Agriculture. He's an economist by training. You were telling us about rural cooperative development centers. Where are they, and how do people find out where they are?
Yeah, a rural cooperative development center is an organization that will work with citizens in their surrounding communities to help them start a co-op, or to help them if they need to improve their financing, or they need some type of feasibility study, or the currently existing co-ops will work with them to give them the kind of consulting that they need, or they'll start up if a community or group of people want to start a new co-op, either a farmer co-op or a consumer co-op or worker co-op. And these centers are and I'm not really sure about this, but I think one of the models for the Rural Cooperative Development Center goes back to the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund, which is located in Georgia and in Epes, Alabama, during the 1960s. And at that time, there was a fair amount of ownership of land by black farmers, and they were losing it rapidly. And they organized co-ops to help retain the ownership of these farms, and they have done an excellent job, and they're still operating today. Ralph Page is the director, and they provide training, technical assistance, and many of the other they were kind of doing the work that my agency did as well, but they were doing it at the grassroots level. And I think many people were looking at the federation, the state councils up in Wisconsin and Minnesota. A man by the name of Neil Struan was kind of looking at the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, and he thought, this is something we should have throughout various other states, and we could assist the local people in setting up cooperatives. And so then it fell. They got a passed in Congress to support rural cooperative development centers, funding, an appropriation, annual appropriation. And my agency sort of administers. We administer the proposals that come in. And help evaluate them, and then we award these grants to these different centers, and they're pretty much all around the country. There's some real excellent ones around. They just do tremendous work, and they tend to get funded year after year. Some of the ones that are just trying to get started, it takes them a while to learn about doing significant cooperative work, and but then we try to encourage new ones to form. So that's an annual appropriation. It's called a Rural Cooperative Development Grant that they can receive. And as I had mentioned earlier, the centers also have other sources of funding as well. So it's been a good program, and it's really been a substitute for the decline of the people we had in Washington in my agency. They were, we used to do that work, but now it's better perhaps to have people out in throughout the states who can do it at the local level.
So, D.C. is urban, yeah. But if somebody is on that's listening, where would they go find out where these cooperative development centers are? Yeah,
you can go to the USDA.gov website, then go to rural development. And then when you're in rural development, you'd have to go to RBS, Rural Business Cooperative Programs. And then from there, you go to the cooperative programs, and then there'll be listings of our various programs. And under the grants, we have value-added grants, and then we have the Rural Cooperative Development Center grants as well. And you'll see that on there. And it will list the ones who are funded. Another place to look is on the webpage is Cooperation Works. If you put in Cooperation Works, probably .coop, C-O-O-P. And Cooperation Works also, that's an organization, actually a cooperative that was formed of all these different centers. And they work together. Sometimes they might have a multi-state project, and they'll work together on it. They work on training and education, and so they and a big supporter, I should add, on education cooperatives today is the farmer cooperative called CHS, which is the biggest. I think it's the biggest farmer cooperative in the world, certainly in the U.S. And CHS Foundation does a tremendous job of even working with these cooperative development centers and working with universities on cooperative education. And they've put out a lot of initiatives. At the University of Maryland, I think there's the Democracy Collaborative, and they work with and then participate a little bit with Cooperation Works, and they are involved in that group. And then there's the Association of Cooperative Educators. It's called ACE, is the acronym, ACE, Association of Cooperative Educators, and all their members are also members of Cooperation Works, and they're people who are from these different state-level rural cooperative development centers. And the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives has gotten a grant from us too, and so, but again, it's supposed to be used only in rural areas, but they themselves work in urban areas.
Who is this?
With worker cooperatives.
Now, who got the grant?
Well, the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives.
Okay.
They got a Rural Cooperative Development Grant, and because by our rules, they're supposed to use it only in what are defined as rural areas, that money. But they have other sources of funding, and they will help set up cooperatives.
You've got a wealth of knowledge. I've just been taking notes. Ralph Page was on this program. He's from the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. He's their executive director. He was on Thanksgiving a year ago, not this past Thanksgiving, but November of 2013. And Cornelius Blanding from Federation of Southern Cooperatives has also been on the program. But I'm quite interested in this Cooperation Works and the Association of Cooperative Education. I didn't know any educators.
Yeah.
And
Canadian and Puerto Rican members are also a big part of Association of Cooperative Educators. We do a lot of work and a lot of members in Puerto Rico.
I've created 4 goals for me for the rest of my life. Growing up, I never knew what I wanted to be. People would ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I don't know. I shrugged my shoulders. And it's only in the last 5 years I've decided that I will, for the rest of my life, promote co-ops. Okay, that's number one. And number two is with a group of us, we're developing housing co-ops, both limited and marketing. And the third one is, that's why I like I've learned a couple ones, is in education, my personal goal. I've taught school for 12 years, 11 at the college level, teaching marketing and mathematics. And I would love to be able to see a degreed program called, I got an MBA, maybe it's a Master's of Business Administration, maybe it's a Cooperative Master's of Business Administration, somewhere here in the U.S. with a school or starting a school. But getting somebody really involved in teaching this cooperation to younger people.
Well, a professor at Southern New Hampshire University, Christine Clamp, she had a program like that, and it was a master's level program on cooperatives, management of cooperatives, and she trained a lot of people who are today leaders of food cooperatives and others. And I don't know the current status of the program. It's always with the university. You got to, try to keep it going and funded. And but has been a pioneer in doing that at the academic level of universities. Most universities really don't have, like you've mentioned, they've been very weak on cooperative education at the university level.
I've said on this program a dozen times, I got my master's from Stanford University. That's very well known and prestigious. I'd never heard the word cooperative. Yeah. Okay, you may talk about cooperation or team building or something like that, but not in the context of there's this whole other business model. The whole model of teaching I graduated in 1976, so the whole model of teaching then and maybe now is, what is the return on investment to the shareholders? So that your decision basis, your model was what's best for the person that has invested the capital, not what's best for the workers, not what's best for the customers. Or that you talked about it, but that wasn't the main focus. Where in a cooperative, the main focus is, if it's a worker co-op, is what's best for the worker and the customer, because if you don't do what's best for the customer, the workers won't make any money. Right. So it's sort of automatic. It's in, like I said, in the DNA.
Yeah, you don't want to make it be so individualistic that you don't have that participation and care of others, and a co-op is a sort of a structured, organized way of having solidarity with your members and working with others and giving people a stable way to live. There's a lot of qualitative values that go into operating a cooperative, but they are competitive businesses, and that's their number one goal. They have to be competitive, but at the same time, with the rules and principles they work under, they generate these kind of benefits to the whole community.
The other thing that I really like about cooperatives, and when you go to a conference with cooperators, you find out that they share information. It just give it away. How can, get a bunch of treasurers together and they talk about, well, we had this problem, this is how we solved it. You don't have this competitive environment of I've got knowledge and I won't share it with you because then you can go get my business. It's just the opposite. Is how do we help each other grow? How do we help each other be successful?
Yeah, there is a lot of that sharing. And I think, they have a sense that we'll be better off as a cooperative if other cooperatives begin to grow and prosper, and more people will learn about them, and then people will be willing to be members and participate. And so I think there's that commonality of they want to see other cooperatives succeed. They don't want to, and sometimes it gets down to, if you're a real, sort of a cynical economist, you might say, well, they're not competing directly. They might be in a different market. And, sometimes, in agriculture, I've seen some farmer cooperatives, compete pretty severely with one another, and then sometimes they end up merging, and then they, will start working together again. But, generally, though, they are very open and like you said, and sharing, and they're not trying to advance anybody's, individual, agenda. They're just trying to make the co-op and its members successful, and that the road to that is to just work with others and partner and share ideas. And they're complicated enterprises to operate, so they get that help from one another to be able to navigate these businesses through very difficult economic times.
When I say I love co-ops, is being in boardrooms with everyday people making decisions. Limited equity co-ops, you may not have anybody with, at best you'd have a high school education, and you watch decisions and how they grapple with information, and they make decisions what's best for the group as opposed to what's best for the individual. And that's what happened over more and more and more and more, which I like them. We're going to take another break. Bruce, the hour goes by fast. We only have one more segment, so we'll be right back to talk to you about everything cooperative, and perhaps you can find some information here to give you the power to go out and start your own cooperative. We'll be right back. Don't touch that dial.
News updates on the web at WOLDCnews.com.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes talking to you about everything cooperative. The National Cooperative Bank sponsors this program. The National Cooperative Bank was developed in the mid-'80s by Congress to provide financing for cooperatives. And they have a very, very tough job because they are working in communities that are economically deprived. And most communities that I grew up in, or most African Americans live in, are communities that are economically deprived, or Latin Americans and Native Americans. So they have to be able to go in and find individuals, and they even end up investing in the individuals that's creating the co-op and the business and how much knowledge they have, because most bankers, they look for how much capital you have. If you fail the making the loan, then they want to be able to go and grab something that you have to replace that money that they loaned you. Where in a lot of times in economically deprived communities that the National Cooperative Bank was designed to help, that capital is not formed. So they have to look at something else, and that's the individuals. And coming together as a cooperatives and trying to figure out how you solve the community problems and getting the information you need, the training and the education information you need so that a cooperative can be successful, is what they would be looking for to make the different types of loans. Whether those loans are with housing, which they do a lot of, or worker co-ops or farmer co-ops, whatever the co-op might be, then they have to make that choice, those decisions. And those are not easy decisions. I take my hat off to Chuck Snyder and the people at NCB to be able to make those loans, and they've been very, very successful since they've gotten started, that they don't have a lot of loans that go under. And the other nice thing is when we just went through this last it's called a Great Recession of 07, 08, there was not a lot of co-ops that went under. And I suggest that that's because when you get a group of people making decisions, then they would make those kinds of decisions that's best for the organization. So they didn't take risky loans that went up the interest rates went up after 3 to 5 to 7 years, which caused the recession to happen in the first place. So I really enjoy working with NCB. I'm glad that they're sponsoring their program. They are a great partner to have. And we have Mr. Bruce Reynolds on, and we only have one more segment left, Bruce. So let's go back and talk about first talk about the future. There are 7 billion people on the planet today, and we're estimating that there will be 9 billion, another 2 billion people in the next 25 years. And the question, I don't have those stats for the U.S., but how do we feed all of those people? What do we do? Named Dame Pauline Green was saying that the way she saw this is International Cooperative Alliance when she was on, saying that the cooperatives are going to be a big part of that, particularly in the world. India and Africa and places where you expect, China, where you expect the population to really grow because there's so many young people. Where in Europe and now in the U.S., you're getting much more older people, so as a percentage of the population, so you won't have the same growth. Matter of fact, I think in Sweden, they had a decrease in population. So what do we do to feed all of these people?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated topic, and there's going to be a lot of approaches to feeding and preserving our environment, and cooperatives, I think, are one part of that, but they're just a part of it. But I think they could be a big part of it. I think for a lot of agricultural resources, one of the problems you can have is depletion, like fisheries can be easily depleted. And several cooperatives have been formed to organize a sharing of the fisheries, and they're kind of like a self-governed areas, and where if they weren't working together, then everybody would be trying to outfish, the next boat. But by working together, they share, and then they market their fish together. And that's also been in forestry, where you don't want to have deforestation, and you can get a lot of small owners to kind of work together to maintain large forest tracts in a more reasonable way if you have everybody, coordinating, communicating together. And grazing in Africa is very important because you have to manage your grazing, and grazing cooperatives are one way to share and preserve the resources. In the United States, during the Dust Bowl of the 20s, there was overgrazing. These big land, livestock companies would just unload and graze massive herds, and a lot of the small ranchers were sort of pushed out. And now, we have a lot of public land, and then there's controlled grazing, and some of it is by, cooperative grazing associations, and they work really well. In some cases, they don't just use the public land. They've gone out. There's a Chimney Canyon Grazing Association. They bought land as a cooperative, the rancher, and they share it and they preserve it by not overgrazing. They have their own rules that the members all agree on. So I think this area of people working together to conserve scarce agricultural resources will be a big part of feeding a growing world population.
Wait a minute. This sounds strange that the way you can feed more is by reserving. The way you can get more is by working together and deciding together. We're not going to have a larger crop, so we put rules on how much you have in crops. So you almost put rules on or limits on how much profit you make. Okay, because you're saying for the environment, which was number 7, concern for the community, concern for the environment, we're all better off if we make these rules and we all live by them.
Yeah, if we don't exploit scarce resources like water and as I mentioned, fish and these things, they have to be managed. And if you let the local people responsible for it, working in cooperatives, they will do that, and and that's one answer. I mean, there's a lot of solutions to various problems. Many of them are technological and everything, but cooperatives are one avenue where I think we can make a real impact on our world today in terms of climate change and other things, and it's consonant with the idea of preserving businesses and trying to maintain them for the future, or housing, affordable housing. All of that is, you participate in as a user, not an investor, but you get a return and you have a profitable, rewarding life, and then you share something, you contribute to the future. You leave behind a better world, and that's and I think cooperatives are our way to do that.
the people from NCBA, National Cooperative Business Association, when they were on, they were saying that when they go out in the they get contracts, they get government loans, not from USDA. Or is it from USDA? Or World Bank.
Yeah.
So
World Bank.
They go out and they help people throughout the world, and they said that they've had farmers that would say things like, after they've joined the co-op and they would learn how to produce better, and working together, they were able to produce more and better crops, right, so that they could feed their family for the whole year.
Right.
I mean, they could sustain their families, and
right,
with those kinds of things, it's not only do you sustain the world, to sustain the planet by doing things together and conserving what you're talking about.
Yeah, they've done a lot of international work. Some of it is funded through the Agency for International Development, and they've gone out and helped organize co-ops throughout Africa and South America, and providing with the technical know-how to improve farming and for people to share in it and to protect the environment while they're doing it. And so it's been a good program that they've done at NCBA.
When I first started this program, I was trying to figure out how I could get Mr. Obama on to talk about community development, since that's where he came out of, because it seemed like co-ops are an ideal way of develop communities to solve community problems, which we've been talking about. Do you have any sense of, during one of the breaks we were talking about this committee that looks like it may form, but how to get the federal government more involved in this co-op and understanding the co-op and how it can help not only the U.S. but the world?
Yeah, there was in the recent Farm Bill proposal for an interagency group, which would be headed up by USDA to work with other departments. And there's an interest in cooperatives in a lot of the different agencies, Commerce, in Department of Labor. They're working with unions. Unions have taken an interest in cooperatives now. And HUD, with its housing, but also consumer co-ops in their overall effort at urban, helping urban communities, and that also ties in with the Congressman Fatah's cooperative legislation for national cooperative development, and the USDA, because of our tradition of working with farmer cooperatives for decades, I guess that's why they want us to take a lead role on it. I hope people will move on it more than they have. We've had some discussions, but we haven't done the outreach to the other agencies to really get it going yet. So that's something that's still on the back burner, but I hope it moves to the front soon.
Well, if there's anything that we can do in the cooperative world to help move it to the front burner, we'd appreciate it. We only have 30 seconds or so more to go, so you have any other comments that you want to leave the group with?
I wanted to just end with, we talked a little about the future. I think many of your listeners might be interested in a book called Collective Courage by Jessica Gordon Nemhard, and she documented a history in America of the black communities forming cooperatives, and it's a really fascinating book. It's well researched. She found examples of co-ops I had no idea that existed, that were formed by black farmers or by black workers and consumers, and also dealing with thought on co-ops that were contributed.
Thank you very much, Bruce. That's wonderful. And we'll see you next Thursday when we have Ann Reynolds, to no relationship to Bruce, from the University of Wisconsin on. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful week.
News updates on the web at WOLDCnews.com.